Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf and to another Books Weekly, my almost regular Sunday video in which I discuss books that I've either finished last week from a previous week, or read last week, or started last week. And the first book I want to talk to you about, a book that I finished last week, is Ruth Ozeki, A Tale for the Time Being. The book was published in 2013, and I've read it, I think, year before last, and I really liked it, and I wanted to reread it ever since, but you know how these things go. You want to reread and then you don't. But then last month, Jenny King over at her channel, I leave a link down below, you should check her out if you're not subscribed already, announced a read-along of this book, and I thought, well, this is the opportunity, now I'm going to reread it, and so I did. Now, Ruth Ozeki is an American writer with a Japanese background. Her mother was Japanese. She's not only an author, but also a filmmaker, and since 2010, a Zen Buddhist priest. So you might expect quite some Zen Buddhism in here, and you would be right. That A Tale for the Time Being is the story split into two tales. One is set in Tokyo, around 2000, 2001. We're not 100% sure. And the main character there is now a 16-year-old girl who has quite a rough life. She was born in Japan, but her parents moved to California when she was very little, and she grew up there until she was 15, and then her father was fired, a dot-com company, and the bubble burst, so he lost his job, and the family had to relocate back to Japan. But obviously, for now, it was not really back to Japan because she didn't know Japan. She didn't speak Japanese very well, and so she is bullied at school in a very harrowing way. Not only verbally, but she is physically abused in some quite horrible scenes, explicit scenes. What her classmates do to her. Her father, back in Japan, doesn't have a job. He's depressed. He's suicidal. He tries to commit suicide. So what now then does is decides, well, life hasn't anything to offer for me. I'm going to end it. But before I do, I will write down my story, and especially the story of my great-grandmother, who is a Zen Buddhist priest. So we follow now through in her journey, when she tells the story of her great-grandmother, but also the story of her family, and how she tries to cope with her quite horrible situation. So that is one timeline and one story. And alternating with that, we have a story set in British Columbia a couple of years later than Nao's story. And the main character here is Ruth, a writer, and her husband Oliver, an environmental artist. Obviously, Ruth is Ruth Ozeki, and her husband Oliver, she is married to Oliver in real life, and her husband is an environmental artist. And Ruth lives on an island, a very secluded island, with her husband, and one day on the beach she finds a plastic container with Nao's diary and some Japanese letters and other items. So we have two stories. One is, the Nao story when she is 16 and what her life is like, and then we have Ruth reading about it in that diary and commenting about it, and also telling us something about her own life. Now, normally, if you would have told me that before I read the book, I would have said, well, I'm not into that whole postmodern bullshit. I'm not going to read it. But this book is different. I really loved Nao's story, for sure, but the fact that we also have Ruth finding the diary, trying to decide what to do with it, what it all means, adds really another dimension to the story. And the whole book plays with the idea of time, with the idea of memory, but also with things like identity, because especially now, who is Japanese but doesn't feel at home in Japan at all, because all she knows is her life in California. So there are a lot of themes explored here: Zen Buddhism, as I mentioned already, and related to the question of time. There is some quantum physics thrown in, but not in a scary way. Don't be afraid. And this is a book that, because it's also beautifully written, really made me think. When you finish it, you have this sort of happy smile on your face, because it's also a hopeful book, but you have a lot of questions. And I like that, when a book makes me think. So if you haven't read Ruth Ozeki's A Tale for the Time Being, I can highly recommend it. It was a joy to reread it, and I'm sure it will not be the last time for me. The next book I read and finished last week was also a reread, and that is Margaret Atwood, The Handmaid's Tale. Now, I don't think Margaret Atwood needs a lot of introduction. She's a very well-known Canadian writer. She is, quote unquote, nominated for the Nobel Prize for Literature. Since a couple of years, people are thinking she deserved the prize. I think so too. She didn't get it this year, but maybe next year. And The Handmaid's Tale doesn't need a lot of introduction either. I think it's a dystopian novel set in the US, when there was a military coup, and the US is now called the Republic of Gilead, which is a dictatorial, fundamentalist Christian society where women are severely oppressed. They are not allowed to work, they are not allowed to earn money, they are only wives or servants. The book was first published in 1985, and sort of, has a revival now. First of all, because a television series has been made out of the book, but probably also because of the political situation in the US. The book is timely now, as it was in 1985. Now, like I said, the book is set in the Republic of Gilead in the US after a military coup. And the main character is called Offred. She is a so-called handmaid, a servant of a specific kind, because the Republic of Gilead suffers from infertility, meaning most of the ruling society can't have children. So what they do is they force women who can bear children to live with one of those families, and in a once monthly ceremony, they are forced to have sex with the man of the family in order to bear a child, which is then not the handmaid's child, but the child of the family. What I found most interesting about the book, and why I think it's worthwhile reading, even though it's more than 20 years old, is in a lot of dystopian books, you have the new dystopian society already established. There are only very few books in which you have people living now who actually lived also in the society before. And that makes it very interesting, because that allows Margaret Atwood, through her main character Offred, to give us a view of the change. How did the change came about? How did it happen? How did it happen so quickly? And I think that is the real interesting theme here in the book. I have to say there are a couple of things a little bit outdated, especially the technical things, but those are so minor in the sense that they don't play such a minor role in the story that they are not off-putting. So The Handmaid's Tale is a really, really harrowing, interesting, thought-provoking book, and I can highly recommend it if you haven't read it already. The next two books I read last week, I want to talk about not very for long, because they were both duds, unfortunately. The first one was My Sister's Bones by Nuala Ellwood. Nuala Ellwood is a British writer, young writer, and My Sister's Bones is her first book, her debut novel. It's a psychological thriller, and it was published last month or the month before, so just very recently. I, I didn't like it. It's about two sisters, Kate and Sally. Kate is a war reporter, reporting, in Syria, in heavy war zones, coming back to England with a serious post-traumatic stress disorder because her mother died. And when she is in her family home, Sally, her sister, is a heavy alcoholic, and then everything takes off from there. Family secrets, murders, disappearances. It was fast paced, all right. The writing was not at all that bad, but the twists and turns were so unbelievable, and the ending was so Hollywood cheesy that I just didn't like it that much, and I can't in good conscience recommend it. And unfortunately, it went downhill from there because after My Sister's Bones, I read Camilla Läckberg, a Swedish author, um, The Ice Princess, which is the first in a series, the Patrick Hedström-series. It was published in 2004, and now there are 10 books out in that series. I think the last one is just, or will be published this year, the 10th installment of the series. Camilla Läckberg, as I said, is a very well-known, very successful Swedish crime writer. By the way, the book was translated by Stephen Murray from the Swedish into the English because I read it in English. And I read this book for a book club I already mentioned a couple of times, and you should really check out. It's the Read Around the World book club from Mel over at Mel's Booklands Adventures, and we read a book by a female author from a different country each month. So this month was Sweden, and because it's October, we picked crime. And I was looking forward to it because I heard a lot of Camilla Läckberg, and she's so successful, and I thought it was one of the worst crime books that I've ever read. It's about a young woman murdered, found in her bathtub. The setting is a little town, Fjällbäcka, in Sweden, and we have Erika Falk, the new main character in the series. She's an author, and there is, of course, because it's a police procedural series, a policeman, Patrick Hedström, the series name giver. I don't know. I don't know where to begin. The writing was bad, and I don't think it's the translator's fault. The characters were cardboard to an extent that it was laughable. The story was one cliche after another. The way women were depicted was just angering. And yeah, there was, and the worst thing I think that you can say for a thriller, it was boring. It was just plain boring. I don't know. Most people in the book club had the same experience, but I can't understand why this author and this series is so popular. So if you love Camilla Läckberg's books, maybe she improved after the first or second in the series. Let me know if you love her, why you love her, and which books, whether you agree with me on the first book and whether there's improvement in later on in the series, because I'm just baffled. But for me, it was just really a bad book. I gave it 1 star on Goodreads, which I hardly ever do, as you know, but I found it unbearably boring and stupid. Well, 2 duds in a week. Not the best of weeks, but that happens, and I'm sure better reading weeks will come. Probably with the next book that I've just started, a non-fiction book, a long essay called Veil by Rafia Zakaria. It was just published in September 2017, and it's part of a series that I really love, and you should check out. I'll leave a link to the series down below. The series is called Object Lessons by Bloomsbury Publisher, and what they do is they ask writers to focus on any object and write a longish essay about it. The books are between 100 and 150, 160 pages, and you have books about socks, about lighters, about burgers, but also about objects that are less tangible, like silence or fume. I think it's a brilliant idea. I really love this series. And Veil, obviously, is an object that is so much in the public debate, in the public eye, that I was really interested. So I requested the book from the publisher through NetGalley, and I'm absolutely looking forward to reading it. So this was it for this week's Books Weekly. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed it despite the two duds in the middle. Talk to me in the comments as always, especially, of course, like I said, if you read Camilla Läckberg's books and like them, because as you might have gathered from my, facial expression, I'm really baffled, and I want to know what people like about her. And I see you soon in my next video. Bye-bye.